Arsen Liliev hits with such speed and power that matches often end before anybody realizes that they have begun. Everything about his style and physique points to one key trait: extreme fast twitch muscle dominance. First, we'll outline what we mean by that. In the muscle tissue of all creatures, there is a rough distribution between two main groups of muscle fiber types. Type 1 muscle fibers are built to sustain output of effort over a long period of time. They consume fuel through oxygen consumption. This aerobic method means that by continuing to breathe, you continuously supply fuel to those muscles. These types of muscle fibers are typically smaller in circumference because they have less need for energy storage within the muscle itself, so they themselves have a less expensive footprint in the energy system. These fibers are most useful for people in endurance sports, who require a lot of medium-level energy output over a sustained period of time, without significant decreases in force production. While Type 1 is excellent at endurance over a long period of time, Type 2 has terrible capacity for sustained energy output. Type 2 is instead more suited for immediate bursts of high force production. This is allowed and enhanced by the structure of Type 2 muscle fibers. Type 2 cells store more glycogen inside the muscle, allowing an anaerobic fuel process that does not rely on oxygen and can produce force quickly but only for a short time. Due to this increased glycogen storage within the fibers, these fibers themselves are much larger in diameter than Type 1. This is where the term glycogen depletion stems from. When a person is deprived of food or energy to resupply the glycogen stores within the muscles themselves seem to shrink and look less full, which can impact both performance after drastic weight cuts or dehydration before competition. So, following this type of system, we can see quite clearly that Type 2 muscles, which are not at all built for efficiency over time, have a much greater capacity for hypertrophy because they are not restricted in size allowance in the same way that endurance muscles would be. And through expansion of those glucose storage capacities, as well as other non-contractile elements like water, enzymes, and metabolic substrates, we get sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. There are two main types of muscular hypertrophy or growth: myofibrillar hypertrophy and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Myofibrillar hypertrophy refers to the increase in contractile proteins, making each muscle fiber stronger and denser. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, on the other hand, is often seen as fake muscle growth and only swelling for show. In some ways, that could be seen as true, since sarcoplasmic hypertrophy will grow the physical size of the muscle cells, but does not by itself increase the contractile strength or neurological efficiency of those muscles to produce force. So for a power athlete who only needed to produce a single or very few bursts of power before resting, pursuing sarcoplasmic hypertrophy may not be that useful, since a cell is already equipped for that burst of power. Instead, the beneficial type of strength training for this one-hit wonder would be to increase the raw contractile strength and neurological efficiency. However, for an athlete who is required to produce a lot of force quickly and then continue to perform, with likely subsequent bursts of force afterwards, a limited supply of energy becomes a problem. So for this athlete who is genetically biased towards shorter bursts of power, despite common consensus, training for sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, aka training purely for size, may actually be of much greater benefit. This is because, by definition, it expands the athlete's muscles' internal fuel tanks, allowing him to use what he already has more effectively by storing more glucose, buffering fatigue, and sustaining burst outputs for longer. We often think of quick, hard-hitting athletes to be small and nimble, which some are, but at the higher end in modern sports, it is more often the case, exaggerated by the use of PEDs, that an athlete who is powerful and big is quite often going to be the most dangerous type. Mike Tyson is a good example of big, lean and powerful, as is Arsen Liliev, Aleksandr Muratov, David Dadikyan, Nodalet Adakian, and many others. And in nature, the gorilla is probably the prime example of this. They are incredibly dense, with about 10 to 15% more muscle on average than a human. Even more importantly though, is that gorillas and chimpanzees have been shown to be composed of a much higher percentage of type 2 fiber types, and a much lower percentage of type 1 than humans. If we watch these animals, we can see exactly the type of patterns we would expect from explosive, fast-twitch dominant creatures. For the majority of time, they are slow, passive, and simply existing, until they need to get something done. And then they explode, attacking, climbing trees, or simply posturing and charging. There is a clear pattern of energy bursts and relaxation, rather than an extended, consistent production of effort. So athletes like Arsen Liliev may have more in common with a gorilla than you'd expect, at least in terms of muscle physiology. Arsen Liliev hits hard and fast, but if you are able to stop him, he quite rapidly burns out, and so you might see him deliberately fouling for a rest and restart. And how does an athlete like Arsen Liliev compensate for this? Well, he could begin trying to train for standard endurance with long static holds and cardio-intensive training, or he could simply train to hit harder and be able to do so for slightly longer periods. And he could do this by increasing the capacity of his existing muscle fibers through both strength training and hypertrophy training. And this is all quite likely enhanced by the use of performance-enhancing drugs. Performance-enhancing drugs, or PEDs, is a very broad-reaching group of substances, but specifically here we are going to discuss how anabolic androgenic steroids, or simply steroids, may enhance this type 2 muscle performance, since these as a group of PEDs directly influence muscle performance and capacity, while other PEDs may enhance performance but through different pathways. Anabolic steroids drastically enhance both myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, especially in type 2 muscle fibers. In practice, this means enhanced athletes often get bigger simply by training for strength. Hypertrophy happens as a byproduct. Natural athletes, by contrast, may require more hypertrophy-specific training to achieve similar structural adaptations. Type 2 muscle fibers have a much greater androgen receptor density and a higher response to mechanical tension and hormonal signals to adapt. Anabolic steroids directly upregulate or increase protein synthesis, which is one of the main drivers of muscle adaptation. They also enhance the proliferation of satellite cells, which then fuse into existing muscle fibers, contributing additional nuclei, and then these new nuclei expand the fiber's ability to synthesize proteins and grow. In some cases, satellite cells may even go on to form entirely new muscle fibers, though this is less common with steroids alone and more often seen with the use of growth hormone. As a result, a type 2 dominant athlete on steroids can experience massive growth even with low-volume strength-focused training. A natural athlete, in contrast, cannot bypass the process. They usually require specific, moderate to high volume training periods. This is not an attempt to discredit Arsen Liliev, or imply that his success came solely from enhancement. It is likely that Arsen was born with a rare genetic mix of explosive power, fast twitch dominance, and aggression, and if he did use PEDs, they only amplified a natural force that was already there. So with that physiological foundation in mind, let's take a look at the actual technical performance behind Liliev's powerful style and how that has developed over his career. First, we'll look at one of his earlier videos. 2005, at 18 years old, 75 kilograms, left hand versus Ruslan Babayev. Liliev is quite a bit smaller than we are used to seeing, but he is also significantly younger. His setup is a little tighter and closer than we'll see later on, looking almost like he wants to get the wrist around and go inside for a hook. In the start, Arsen is actually the slower of the two, with Ruslan getting him partially hooked, but Arsen is able to counteract with an outside top roll to negate his finger containment and slip. In the straps, both seem to be doing more or less the same as before, although Arsen seems to be a bit higher in the grip, as though he's aiming to punch through the top of Ruslan's fingers in a pure high top roll, which he does, keeping pronation and elbow angle while taking Ruslan's wrist. But Ruslan still has some strength to push sideways through a dead wrist. Arsen is able to keep the pressure high, rolling through the fingers to peel his hand backwards behind the elbow and shoulder, but the referee calls an elbow foul. In the reset we see the same type of setup. Arsen is going again through the top, and Ruslan has come in closer, with clear space between his lower fingers and the wrist. He obviously wants to clamp down aggressively to try and take Arsen's pronation away from him at the start, but if Arsen is fast enough, that same dead space also allows him to punch up and into the fingers with momentum, and that is what happens. Arsen is clearly quick enough to gain pronation and prevent Ruslan from getting a good purchase on his hand. Arsen is high in Ruslan's fingers while he barely holds on through a supinated and almost extended wrist. From here, Ruslan would have to brute force his way sideways and hope Arsen's elbow does not have the integrity to withstand that. But Arsen seems to be able to keep a tight elbow, even getting tighter and rising up in the hands to peel Ruslan's arm away from him, ending with a win for Arsen. This is not quite the Arsen Liliev technique we are used to, but it shows how Arsen is strong in the top roll, both technically and physically. Next, in 2011, we have Arsen Liliev versus Vitaly Laletin, not a match you would probably see today. Arsen is posting his hand much higher than before now, with the knuckles facing straight up. This puts Laletin in quite a difficult position, since to remain legal he has to grip relatively low, with his elbow all the way to the back of the pad and a very horizontal forearm, meaning that if Liliev was able to pronate over the top of Laletin's wrist, he would be in a very difficult position. Instead though, we see Liliev hitting straight into Laletin's fingers with the entire ridge of his hand, which opens them slightly along with the wrist, but also drags Laletin forward across the pad, giving Liliev a massive leverage advantage which lets him easily pin. In the same year, we see Liliev versus Denis Cyplenkov. Denis seems to be wrapping his fingers around as usual, aiming to contain everything in his hand, whilst Arsen is positioned to hit straight into those fingers. Unfortunately for Arsen, Denis has quite strong hands, and is able to catch and supinate Arsen in his hit, and then reel him back in. Arsen seems slightly injured, grabbing the inside of the elbow near the pronator, which is quite likely from hitting with that much force against fingers as strong as Cyplenkov's, forcing him into supination by jolting all of that force generated into the pronating muscles. Next, in 2012, we have Liliev versus Krasimir Kostadinov, with both athletes at or around their peak conditions. In the setup, Krasimir obviously wants to come inside and down to hit a hook against Liliev's wrist, while Liliev, as usual, wants to pull backwards and through Krasimir's wrist and fingers. It is a classic top roll versus hook style setup, and one that really comes down to which one can do their own technique better, faster, and stronger. On the hit, Liliev is able to supinate and catch Krasimir on a non-cupped wrist. However, Krasimir's fingers are still able to hold Liliev's hit, and he is able to keep his shoulder behind his hand, whilst Liliev is approaching an end of ability type position. But then Liliev is able to leverage and pronate just that final amount to peel back Krasimir's entire hand, forcing him into a flop press and then a slip. In the straps we see the same thing again, hook versus top roll. On the hit, Krasimir is able to keep Liliev more deeply contained within his hand, with Liliev not in a particularly strong position, with no real option except to keep back pressure and try to roll to the side. Krasimir is more or less able to hold him, but Liliev's pronation seems to be wearing him down. At the same time, Liliev too is becoming exhausted quickly, which allows Krasimir to gain position and deeper wrist flexion whilst Liliev bleeds out. And it seems Liliev understands his position and uses a back pressure driven surge to leverage Krasimir's elbow off the pad, forcing a foul, which makes a second in a row for Krasimir, so Liliev gets the win. In the next setup we see the same thing again, inside hook versus back pressure. This next hit is much better for Krasimir and puts Liliev in a bad position. He has no pronation and only shallow wrist flexion, while Krasimir is keeping him contained deep in the wrist and without the hand going outside the shoulder. This again really only allows Liliev to roll over the top or pull backwards, which he does but exceeds the allowance of the elbow pad and gets the foul. The rest of this is pretty much the same, ending with Krasimir winning with a combination of denying Liliev his primary strengths and Liliev fouling. Further on in 2012, we see Liliev versus Todd Hutchings, which is an interesting setup because the Todd Hutchings we know today is very dominant against top rollers. However, when someone is able to very quickly pull Toddzilla outside of his shoulder line, things can go badly. Liliev here seems to be setting up slightly more to his side than straight backwards, while Todd is looking to come inside too. But Liliev's hit is too fast and immediately takes away anything Todd has. A pin but a foul before it. Second attempt. Liliev has set up high in Todd's hand, looking to do the same thing again, which he does. There is no pronation over the top, this is just pure full hand back pressure with strong elbow and wrist flexion. Throughout the rest of this match we see more of the same, with what is generally considered to be Arsen Liliev's signature style. Strong hand, strong wrist, strong elbow, all pulling back very aggressively. It is nothing fancy or technically complex, but it's the culmination of years of practice and extreme specific strength. In 2013 he tried the same thing again against Cyplenkov. But this time Cyplenkov is just far too strong and has the finger strength to contain Liliev and let his own hit undo him so that Cyplenkov can simply pull him back and pin him over and over again. So we can say that in general, if Liliev is able to open you enough with his initial hit, then he's probably winning. But if you have the superhuman inside and containment strength, then the chances are that Liliev's technique is going to expose himself and the odds become shifted. Does this mean that Liliev could have been better if he had tried to develop more ways to attack? Possibly yes, but also probably not. Consider that he has spent around 15 years at least refining and strengthening the same technique. That is a lot of time and repetitions that have clearly done well enough for him. If he had split that time across other techniques, he may have developed more tool in his kit, but it would almost certainly detract from how well developed that primary tool became. So much like the athlete trying to train outside of their specific genetic traits, like muscle fiber types, spreading yourself too thin in your abilities might give you a lot of abilities, but you're unlikely to be exceptionally good at any of them. Almost every top puller has a specific style of pulling that is their go-to, even against opponents who, by logic, you could say instead they should try another technique against, because that default technique might not work well against that opponent. But if you are able to simply make that technique stronger, it improves the odds and improves the athlete for the future. So should you train every style, every technique, every method of training? Perhaps, but it's important that you think about it as searching rather than switching. Almost everybody is going to find a default style of things that works for them with minimal resistance. A puller who is exceptionally tall and long-limbed should, by textbook, typically take advantage of that and use their leverages to punch through the top of the hand in a top roll. But what if top roll just doesn't work for them? What if the vast majority of their wins are done by hooking? Well, that seems to be the one which has a proven track record. Maybe strengthening that might be more beneficial. Like most sports, arm wrestling is very much a try and see type system, and it will take years before you can confidently consider what your preferred style is, and you will need to have tested yourself in competition settings against significant opponents for your attempt to class yourself conclusively as a top roller or hooker to have real-world validity. It's the same thing that Mike Tyson said. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So it is also true that everyone has a plan until Arsen Liliev hits the ready go. You can theorize and plan as much as you want in the gym, but until you put your elbow on the pad and grip up in a competition scenario, you don't really know what exactly you're planning or preparing for. A strong wrist curl is definitely useful for arm wrestling, but what use is it if you are slow and the opponent top rolls you before you can even attempt to use that strength? A year of dedicated table practice, even if the table is not an official one, will make you a much better arm wrestler than simply training in the gym. But that's it for today. A look at muscles, a look at Arsen Liliev, and a look at the individual. I'll see you next time.